Oh my goodness. Morning training. Whoa. What I ended up doing there was a FTP VO2 max kind of building session, 4 times 8 minutes, just above FTP, 2 minutes rest in between. C hard. Wow. I did that on the gravel bike here. Now, gravel biking has really only been around in the last 3-4 years, seriously, but it is taking off. I think it's going to take over the world because it's so versatile. With a lot of people buying their first gravel bikes, there's a lot of questions that people are asking online. What's the difference between a gravel bike and a road bike? How much faster is a road or a triathlon bike versus a gravel bike? Can you use gravel bike for all of your training? What type of gravel bike should you get, and what features should you look for in a gravel bike? While buying a bike might seem simple, it can be one of the most expensive mistakes that you can make. I know I made that $1,600 mistake early on in my endurance sports career. So if you watch this video to the end, what I'm going to go through are all of those questions. What are the must-haves and the, you know what, don't worry about it with buying a gravel bike? What should you be looking for so that you don't make that mistake that I made many moons ago? And my answer to a lot of those questions, being someone who is known online as Triathlon Taren, is really going to surprise you, guaranteed. Now, you might be saying, hey, Taren, it's really easy for you to say, well, you need a tri bike, and then you need a road bike, and now you need a gravel bike because, hey, you are sponsored by Canyon and you get them for free. Well, I'm actually going to flip that on its head and say that if you can only afford one bike, it should be a gravel bike, not those other bikes. What? Watch this video to the end and you'll find out why. Buying that bike, your first bike, or any bike, is a really big decision because it's a lot of money. And I made the mistake when I first got into road cycling and triathlon that I went, you know what? I'm not gonna do a whole lot of thinking about this. I'm just gonna go in and buy an entry-level bike because I'm an entry-level person. And that is actually how I made that $1,600 mistake. We'll go in here, I'll explain how you should approach buying this bike or any bike. Let's talk about the differences between a gravel bike and a road bike, because on the surface they're gonna look very similar, but they're designed for two slightly different things. However, you can duplicate the uses if you get the right gravel bike. For starters, the wheelbase of a gravel bike is gonna be a little more slack, a little bit more relaxed. That means the back wheel and the front wheel are a little bit further from each other. That's because on a road bike, you need to be able to handle a little bit better. It needs to be twitchy so that you can respond quicker. Whereas on a gravel bike, you're typically not riding in a pack, you're not doing really sharp turns. You want a little bit more comfort. So that more slack geometry gives you that little bit of a smoother kind of ride. And that smoother kind of ride is what a lot of the differences between a road bike and a gravel bike amount to. A gravel bike is going to have a couple of comfort features to absorb that chatter on trails and gravel. So for instance, with the Canyon Grail here, you can see that I've got a 2-level base bar. You spend most of your time actually in here when you're just riding along. And this is going to absorb some of the shock. A really good gravel bike is going to have something to absorb that shock in the front end. Also, a lot of gravel bikes are going to have some sort of feature on the Grail here. It's a bit of a split seat post that's going to absorb a little bit of the shock there. So you're gonna have a little bit less chatter up front here. You're gonna have a little bit less chatter there. And then combine that with the other feature that's different is the tires. These tires are kind of like in between a mountain bike tire and a road bike tire. Whereas most road bike tires max out at a clearance of around 28 millimeters wide, this is actually a 40 millimeter wide tire, and there's still clearance for even more. You can get a really big tire, and what most people are doing when they start getting into gravel riding is similar to what they do with a mountain bike. They make it tubeless, and by making it tubeless, you can put less PSI into the tire, and that's going to allow it to still run just as fast, have just the same rolling resistance as a tire that's really pumped up, but it's going to be able to roll that bit smoother and give less of a shock to your body because the tire is just a little bit softer and more compliant. Overall, it's designed for light
trail work, but that doesn't mean that you can't do other riding with this bike. And that's where it gets super interesting. Now you might be saying, well, it's only really meant for light trails and there's more resistance and it's really just built for comfort and not speed, so it's slower and it's designed for something that I'm not racing on. And then people may be thinking, well, like, why would you buy a gravel bike? Well, if you're thinking that, you're not looking at it quite right. Yes, it's designed for being slack and a little bit more comfortable, so you can take this gravel bike and not just do gravel, but you can do long bike packing endurance rides, like huge adventures. The vegan cyclist did a 7-day bike packing trip and everything was mounted to this Grail that he had. You can also use this for road riding. If you just switch out the wheels and instead of having to buy an entire new bike, if you have the same gear ratio, you still have the same set of brakes, you just have a narrower tire and a wheel set that is designed more for road cycling. We have lots of people that in our group ride, they actually are riding a gravel bike for the road bike. So even though it's a little bit more slack, it's not quite as responsive. If you are a good rider and you have good bike handling skills and you know the people around you, you can ride plenty fast on this. Now, speaking of speed, it is going to be slower, but not drastically slow. That ride that I did this morning, I ended at just under an average of 30 kilometers an hour, right around 18 miles an hour. If I had done that on a souped up road bike, probably would have been around 35 kilometers an hour, somewhere around 21 miles an hour. So you can still go fast on this, and that's even with still these gravel specific tires. So switch it out to road tires and I bet you it would be almost right up to that 34 kilometers an hour that I would see on a road bike. The gear ratio is gonna be different, so that's why I would recommend having a full set of road wheels so you can get the right gear ratio if you wanna ride this with road. Now finally, here's the really interesting thing. Because it is very similar to a road geometry, you can theoretically slap a set of aero bars on here and do a triathlon. Now, when we start looking at a gravel bike that can be on gravel, that it can be in trails, and you can use it similar to a mountain bike, you can swap out the wheels and do road riding on it. You can then slap a set of aero bars on it and do a triathlon. Now, is it going to be ideally suited for absolutely all of these? No, it's a gravel bike. It's built for gravel. But you can set this up for all of those other different sports. You can't say that for a tri bike. You can't say that for a road bike. It just doesn't work with all of the tolerances and clearances and the setup of those bikes. It doesn't allow them to be as versatile as this bike is. This bike is anywhere. Like somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago, well, where do you ride a gravel bike? Anywhere you want, bro. So let's say you're bought in, you're thinking about buying a gravel bike. What are the specific things that you need to look for when you are buying it? Number one, you ideally want to make sure that the wheels are tubeless compatible. Taking out the tubes, being able to run that lower PSI, it's gonna be way more comfortable than if you've got tubes in there. You wanna make sure that the handlebars and the seat have some sort of comfort feature built in. It doesn't have to be the two-step or the split, but in a lot of cases, you're gonna want some sort of feature beyond just the low PSI on your tubeless tires to get that chatter out of the bike. If you are looking at using this for a tri-bike, you wanna make sure that the handlebar setup can accept a pair of clip-on aero bars. This Canyon Grail doesn't actually really have that ability, but the new Grizzle Canyon bike does have just a more traditional tube style drop bar, and you can clip onto that. As far as price point goes, this is where I want to make sure that you don't end up in that situation where you're wasting $1,000, $1,500. I don't look at a gravel bike the same way that I look at a fat bike. A fat bike, I look at it as like it is not meant for performance. So you can go and buy an $800 fat bike and it's gonna do the same job essentially as a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 fat bike, albeit just not as fast and not as nice. But because you're not using it for performance, and in most cases people are just buying a fat bike just to get out in the winter, hey, 800 bucks, it still gets you out. Whereas with a gravel bike, you are probably going to want a little bit of performance. You are going to maybe want to do some intervals. You are maybe going to want to do some road riding on it. You are maybe going to want to actually do some racing on it or some group riding or do that triathlon. So in that case, I start looking at it from the standpoint of like, What do you need? How much do you need to spend to make sure that you are getting a good enough bike that it's going to perform well while not setting yourself up to lose a ton of money because of the depreciation of getting this super expensive bike? And this is how I recommend that you approach all bike purchases. Generally speaking, I recommend that people stay out of that sub $2,000 range for a bike that is built for performance. The reason for that is because they depreciate a lot. They depreciate, for one, because their group sets are entry-level group sets, and not a lot of people want to buy a used entry-level group set on the bike. And they depreciate a lot because the vast majority of people that are getting into riding are buying those entry-level bikes and maybe giving them up more often than people who are dedicated to cycling. So Craigslist and Kijijis and eBays of the world are just flooded with used entry-level road bikes, gravel bikes, tri bikes, and that just drives down the price. So when you buy that entry-level bike and you want to move up and on from it, which everyone does, I guarantee it, you're gonna be selling it for peanuts. In my case, I basically sold a $1,500 bike for, I think, $400 just 15 months later. So the way that I would approach it is, if you can buy a bike that is over $2,000 new and buy used for under $2,000, great. What you want to look for is a group set that is SRAM, Force, or higher. This is like Shimano Ultegra or higher. So Shimano Ultegra, Shimano Dura Ace, SRAM Red, SRAM Force. These are group sets and builds that are not that entry-level SRAM or Shimano group set that is going to depreciate really, really quickly. So save your money where you can so that you can spend a little bit extra on, if you are going to clip on some aero bars. Or you don't have to do this, but you can get yourself a pair of gravel cleats and shoes. Again, you don't have to. I rode for the first 3 months of this bike's lifespan in road shoes and was perfectly fine. And if you do that, you can save that money to get yourself a pair of road cycling wheels. So definitely strongly consider getting a gravel bike. It makes riding so much more enjoyable because you can get out, you can explore, you can do all different types of riding on this bike because it is so versatile. You can still do all of your intervals and hard training on it like I did today. I went and ripped intervals as if it was just a regular road bike. And you know what? Gravel is my favorite color right now. Now, depending on when you watch this, our training app at app.mymotive.com might yet have, it should be like beginning of July, we're hoping, the ability to actually put in specific road rides, crit races, cycling specific races, enduro races, grand fondos, cycling races that are done with plans. And these plans are done by Dylan Johnson, the YouTuber who we've had on our podcast and we worked with to create those plans. So really, really good training. So if you're seeing this after and you want some cycling specific training or triathlon training or run training, it'll all be there at app.mymotive.com. So gravel, great N+1 bike or a great first bike. Have fun. And if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button below. Later, Trainiacs.